Hello everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm reviewing from the Revival Season 1, Episode 10, which is called The Lions. So we start this one in the country of Bajandu in the Himalayas. In a sanctum, we see a man who we find out is named Ki end a ceremony with a group of priests in the sanctum. His henchman priest, Jeru, brings him a box with 5 golden lions, which he swaps for 5 lions on top of a ceremonial fountain, explaining to Jeru and the audience that the golden figures look identical but have different weights, which will be important for an upcoming ceremony to declare a new king. One of the priests returns to find the 2, and Ki fools him into getting too close to the font and disrupting the water, releasing blades that impale him. And he tells Jeru to get rid of the body. Jim goes to the San Francisco Zoo for instructions this time, and uses spy speak to find the location of his disc player. The mission: Ki is the younger brother of the recently deceased king of Bajandu, and has hatched a plan to prevent his nephew Mikos from ascending the throne, and perhaps even continuing to live. The IMF must give Mikos a fair chance to become ruler, as Ki is hostile to Western interests. A note, you might recognize Ki. He's James Shigeta, a very prolific actor of Japanese descent. And he is the first guest star from the original series. He was in the episode Butterfly, where he played a henchman named Shiki, to appear in the revival. That's if you don't count Greg Morris from The Condemned, who was, of course, a very, very special and different kind of guest star. Anyway. In the apartment scene, the IMF discusses the trial for the would-be king, involving balancing the statues on the font without disrupting it, other than being beaten over the head about the fake statues with the subtlety of a ball-peen hammer. Yeah, we get it. They're different weights. He has to balance it, yada, yada. This is actually a decent apartment scene that doesn't reveal too much about what exactly the IMF is going to do. Casey and Max arrive as Western reporters. Grant drops in with some big boxes. Nicholas meets him so that they can take the supplies to the palace via a yak cart or something. Jim arrives as a tutor specifically requested for the prince by his British mother. And Mikos comes to the room for his lesson, demonstrating the humility and respect his father taught him. Mikos confides in Jim about how he misses his father and feels that he's not strong or smart enough to follow in his footsteps, and says that Jim's lessons are useless to him other than any help to pass the test of the lions and become king. Later, Jim gets a visit from Mikos' mother, Michelle Faulkner, who asks him not to talk to her son about the challenge. In fact, she urges him to try and get Mikos to forget about it and return with her to England, lamenting that the stress of ruling took her husband from her and is torn at the thought of losing her son to it. Meanwhile, Ki and Jeru discuss that so far their plan is going perfectly. No one suspects anything toward about the dead priest, because they got a death certificate saying he died of natural causes. They've set Mikos up to fail the test, and if he refuses to take the test, they'll have a case for the prince and his mother to be expelled from the country, allowing Jeru to set up an unfortunate accident for them. In the outdoor market, Mikos and Jim continue to discuss his apprehension and fears, but of course his wish and hope to be able to make his father proud and continue his legacy. Jim asks him what his father told him about the test, because obviously his father passed it. And Mikos says that his father told him that the lions represent different virtues that a king needs, and the test is not just to become a king, but to become a man. The IMF set up shop in a tent outside the palace. Nicholas goes in as an insurance agent to check on the precautions Ki has taken to safeguard the valuable lion figures. He is taken to the sanctum where he's shown the medieval guards on 24-hour patrol, but also the very modern sonic alarm guarding the font at floor level. Ki arranges a room so that Nicholas can stay and keep an eye on things. Casey arrives as a magazine reporter named Corey Bennett with her cameraman Max, with Grant hidden in the trunk of their car so that he can get into the palace as well. She says she wants to find out more about Ki at a personal level, and for some reason ends up invited for dinner. Maybe it's the obvious reason. On their way out, for some reason, they go through the temple area where Nicholas is standing, and he hints to Ki that Corey Bennett is not quite who she claims to be. Grant manages to climb up the palace walls to Jim's room, where Nicholas joins them, donning a Giroux mask and robe. Jim finds the real Giroux, tells him that the prince has just shown him a secret book about the Golden Lions. So, of course, Giroux follows him to check it out. Nicholas, as Giroux, knocks him out and takes his place. Key arrives in the room unexpectedly, forcing Jim to make up a story about being concerned for Mikos' security, allowing Nicholas as Giroux to leave and meet up with Casey and Max in the market, where they stage a scene of Giroux taking a bribe from them as Key is having them followed. Grant and Jim discuss the lion challenge, with Grant using some computerized imagery of the individual lions to try and figure out this 1,000-year-old puzzle. And unfortunately, they basically give away the best part of the episode. I'll have more to say about that later. Nicholas as Giroux uses a detector to find Key's hiding place, leaving behind a thread from his robe. Casey arrives for dinner as Key looks at the pictures from the marketplace, with Max in the trunk this time so that he can sneak in and join Grant for a climb up to the roof of the palace. Meanwhile, Jim gets another visit from Queen Michelle, who says she's checked him out and found that he's actually not known by anyone at Mikos' school. Jim assures her that he is equally as concerned for her son's safety as she is. She seems a bit comforted by this. High up in the palace, Max uses a pulley to lower Grant down towards the lions above the font, allowing him to attach some small hidden pieces to them. As Max raises him back up, Nicholas gasses one of the guards and returns to Jim's room so that he can become himself again. Meanwhile, Casey and Key have some wine. He hints that she might actually be after something more valuable than just an interview. Grant drops Giroux's talisman from up above, setting off the sonic alarm and allowing Casey to get away, while Key goes to investigate. Key investigates finding the gas guard and the talisman, then checks out his safe, pleased to find the real lion's safety inside, but disturbed as he finds the thread from Giroux's robe. Jim wakes Giroux up, tells him that Key wants to see him, which is true, of course. Giroux has no idea what's going on, and Key confronts him with the evidence, a duplicate alarm control, the pictures from the marketplace of Giroux taking money, and the thread from the safe area. Key says he's figured it all out. The Americans bribed Giroux to switch the figures back to the real ones, so that Mikos would pass the test, stabbing Giroux fatally as he tells him that the plan has failed, as he's figured it out and still has time to make it work by putting the false statues back. It's time for the test. And Jim asks the edgy Mikos what he would do if someone offered to tell him the answer. Mikos says that he won't cheat. Nothing good can come from that in the end. But it seems that he's on the right track towards a solution. Mikos approaches the font with Key, the priests, Jim, and his mother watching. Mikos is about to start placing the figures carefully on the font, but then stops himself. Taking the plate from the high priest, he puts the figures on it, realizing the virtues must be considered equally, and successfully places a plate on the font, to Key's abject shock. Jim activates a button on his pen, which sets off the devices Grant attached, heaters which melt the counterfeit gold figures in Key's safe, and Key has an absolute conniption on discovering this. He rushes back to the temple, accusing Mikos of destroying the real lions and telling the guards to kill him, but they don't obey in the confusion, as Jim has to restrain Michelle from interfering and possibly getting hurt. Key makes a rush for the font in an effort to demonstrate that the lions were tampered with, but upsets the balance, see what happened there? And is impaled by the blades, as the new King Mikos and the others silently leave the temple, as do the IMF. Mission accomplished. I'm going to do my grading and review in an unorthodox way. I'm not going to start with the grade, because I want to kind of do the discussion first. Let me start by putting this episode into the perspective that for me is the most prominent, and kind of go in a little bit of reverse order here. Starting with the callback to the original series. The episode that I feel is most like this episode from the original series is the heir apparent, which is The episode that I put at the very top of the Mission Impossible episode ranking list, I did not do that. That didn't happen by accident. And I do not invoke that episode as a callback and a comparison to this episode lightly. Not at all. They are very, very different in certain ways, and I'm going to go over all that. But in terms of some important things, they are very similar, and I do feel that the callback and the comparison is apt. The story is very similar. The little things from the heir apparent also come to the fore in this episode, like special music. The music in this episode is excellent and gives it just such a tremendous ambiance throughout, and that was also the case in the heir apparent. The story, as I mentioned, is really fantastic. It is a similar kind of story about a person kind of ascending to the throne and preventing, a bad guy from doing so. Although, of course, the major difference is that in the original series, the story unfolded. We watched it happen. And we had an idea of what was going to happen and the technique that the IMF was going to use in order to make it happen, but it visually unfolded. Here, the story is kind of laid out almost as if one were reading it from a storybook to a small child, where a lot of details are given here and there. And the audience is treated a little bit, given the goldfish treatment a little bit, in that, well, we can't be sure that they'll figure it out by themselves, so we'll have to kind of lay it out for them, which is somewhat unfortunate. However, it is both of them are great stories, and talking specifically about the story now of this episode, The Lions. The big reason that I feel that it deserves to be at least put in, it talked about the same way as we did the heir apparent, as I did, okay, is because the story makes you feel. And that was the big thing that I mentioned about the heir apparent. Barbara Bain's performance made you feel what was going on in the episode. And in the same way, no, not in the same way, but in different ways, we achieve that same thing. This episode makes me feel what's going on because not just the story, but actually the characters. We are rooting for young Prince Mikos the entire way. Now that I've kind of laid out where I'm coming from in terms of positioning the episode, let's talk about the good. Visually, this episode is probably, it's definitely the best one that we've seen so far in the revival. And frankly, again, just because of the breakthroughs in technology, any episode in the revival is technically visually better than we saw back in the 60s or 70s. And this is definitely the best so far. The way that we see, the detail put into the set for the palace and the sanctum looks very, very neat. The mountainous background that you see out the windows of, or not really the windows, but the openings, of the rooms, they're a green screen. You can tell if you have HD TV. You certainly wouldn't have noticed 30 years ago, but still, visually they look good. Unless you look really, really close and are actually looking for it, you wouldn't notice. For me, the biggest part was the scene where Grant is lowered down on the pulleys by Max. Visually, that is so stunning. Great camera work there. Watching it happen, it has the right level of suspense. And I would compare that to the sequence, going back to the heir apparent, of when Barbara Bain as Princess Celine is opening that puzzle box. and there's the music behind it, giving it the proper level of suspense, and everything's kind of moving just a little bit slowly, but just at the perfect pace to generate the right level of suspense, and again, that feeling about what is going on. I also want to say, in regards to the characters that make us feel, Prince Mikos is what I would have referred to back in the original series as an incidental character. We don't really have the same type of incidental character here as we did in the original series. Back in the original series, I refer to incidental characters as those characters who generally, they weren't named or targeted as part of the mission that was given to Jim by the voice on tape. But they become the focus of the story through circumstances, and in some cases almost by accident. Here it's a little bit different because of the new way that Jim is given his instructions. All of the characters are basically shown, all of the important characters are shown on the disc, and so we don't have people who are kind of just surprises out of nowhere the way that we did in the original series. But that's okay. He's still that type of character. And the key point about a good incidental character is somebody who gets integrated in the plot and interacts with the IMF in a way that makes us feel for that character. So he definitely qualifies. Again, as just a little bit of a callback, Mikos reminds me a little bit of Paul Bainbridge from A Ghost Story. Just in terms of the character that he plays, not in terms of the story. But just, he's just a kid who misses his dad, and he's trapped in this big world where all of these things are going on. And, he's just a kid who misses his father. That's it, So I just wanted to point that out, that's something that struck me. Again, there's a lot of feeling going on in this episode. I also think that Diane Craig deserves props as his suitably concerned mother. Her concern for her son really comes across so well in her voice and in her mannerisms and the way that she talks to Jim and expresses her concerns about, oh my God, I lost my husband. Must I lose my son too? These people seem real. They seem genuine. That's why you feel it. It's almost as though you can get lost in this episode and lost in this story because of that. These are real people. That's how I felt watching this. And I think part of that is due to, and I don't know whether this was deliberate, but it's some very effectively used basic psychology in the way that we have contrasting scenes. We get a scene with Mikos, and then we get a scene with Key, or we get a scene with his mother, and then a scene with Key. And it's kind of back and forth between the good and the bad, so to speak, showing that contrast. And that also contributes to the overall feel that there's that kind of interplay. And it's almost kind of subconscious, but it is there. And kudos to the writers and the producers for pulling that off, and real props for, putting together an effective episode from that feel standpoint. The last point I'll say about the good is that this is actually a really effective Kansas City shuffle. Haven't used that term much when we're talking about the revival, but the IMF do pull that off effectively by making Key believe that, he's figured out the plan and he has a way to undo it. Again, very much like was done in the Heir Apparent back in the day. However, that's where I have to seg into what's not so great. Damn it, Key is just so lame. And that is really where the comparison, or at least the togetherness with the Heir Apparent just completely falls apart. He's almost a polar opposite to Charles Aidman, who played General Cassette in the Heir Apparent. General Cassette was the exact opposite of lame. He was in control. He was in command. He knew what he was doing. He had it figured out. And, his only problem was that he was so confident in himself because he felt that he held all the cards, that the IMF found a way to use that confidence against him. But they took him right to the edge to make him where he made a mistake. Despite the great Kansas City shuffle that the IMF pulled off, Key is certainly not so smart as to necessarily warrant it. There doesn't seem to be a lot of difficulty pulling off this mission. We're told about the palace security. The IMF is basically able to get around seemingly at will. Also, just the layout of the place. Key's meeting room, where he has his safe, it seems to be almost directly connected, or at least maybe there's a little hallway between them, to the main temple and sanctum, which is like the most sacred and special and important place, spiritually and in this case politically, for the whole country. And that seems to be the main way in and out of the entire building. That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? If it is such an important place, it should be, limited access towards the back of the building or towards one side of the building or something like that. It just really seems weird for that to be the case. The only real challenge the IMF has is making sure that Key doesn't stray from the garden path that they are leading him down. That seems to be the only challenge or difficulty in this episode that I can see. And now the most important thing that I wanted to talk about before I give my grade. The ending. Oh my gosh, the ending. It gets ruined in two different ways, which really can be traced back to, I feel, the same root thing. There is a scene in the middle of the episode where Jim and Grant has done, kind of an analysis using his computers and his technical skill about the Golden Lions. Why he's doing a computer analysis of something that's, millennia old, that's a question for another time. But, they talk about, what is entailed in terms of like completing the test. And then Jim gives us the answer and spoils the ending for us. At one point, Jim basically says, well, based on what you said, Grant, there can be only one answer. That is where that conversation should have ended. They should have stopped there. They should have cut the scene or whatever you like. That's all that Jim needed to say. Why did they have to spoil the ending for us? Even if they feel that, okay, let's do this so that a 7 or 8-year-old child can understand this episode. Let's give them the dialogue that they need. You still wouldn't have to spoil the ending for them and tell them what the ending of the story is in the middle of it, do you? Why would you do that? And that really, really ruins it for me. At the moment where Mikos figures out the solution to the challenge and takes the tray from the high priest and puts the figures on it, and he stands there and he says one word, equal. That was a fist-pumping moment right there. That would have been just awesome, that he figured it out by himself, doing the right thing. Could have cheated. He was afraid, but he overcame it. That's how you tell a story. And that is how you create a winner out of the story. They did all of that, as I've already talked about, to make us feel and want this guy to win. And instead of giving him an awesome, Hulk Hogan-esque victory, they just made it a victory. And that would have been the way to avoid it. Instead of all of the dialogue that remained in that scene between Jim and Grant, they could have taken that time, or even in that scene, or they could have put it in some other scene and done it some other way, to fix the other problem with the ending. After Mikos completes the test, And then Key rushes out of the room, realizes that, the figures in his safe have been destroyed. Then he runs back to the room and starts, yelling his accusations. And then finally, disrupts the balance by reaching over the font and, getting impaled by the blades. Prince Mikos just kind of walks away. And so does the rest of the entourage, just leaving Key there dead. That is just weird. It doesn't make sense. Unless it was just that, well, we don't know how else to end this episode. That's the only explanation that I have. If somebody can come up with some other explanation for that, I would really love to hear it. There would have been time if we had just removed some of the unnecessary dialogue. It's lame dialogue, all of this stuff. We had it in the apartment scene as well, reiterating all of this stuff about what Key's done and about, the different weights and all of that stuff. Take that out. It's lame dialogue, but here it's misplaced dialogue. They could have easily replaced it with dialogue that would have made that last scene make sense. Just something, anything about how once, the high priest declares that the test is complete, nobody must touch the font, or else, whatever happens to them, well, they're on their own and nobody's allowed to interfere. And that's why everybody leaves and just leaves Key behind, because, that's the decree of the Bajandu gods or whatever. Fine. Anything would have been better than nothing that Mikos just leaves because we don't know how else to end this episode. That's my feeling there. I mentioned this about many episodes, if you go back and look at the big ranking list, where I said that, gosh, this was such a great story, and it would have been so much better if they had just landed the ending. And this is another case of that. It's a really, really huge case of that. I dare say that if they had done the two things that I just mentioned to fix the ending, they didn't have to make it perfect, but even if they had made it just good and proper, that this probably would have been one of the best, if not the best, episodes of the revival. I'm going to finish with my grade for the episode. There's so much good here, as I have said, and again, just the unfulfilled potential of the episode with that ending, and also they could have made Key a more formidable villain. I'm going to say that I'm going to give this episode a B+. It hurts me to say that because I really, really do love the episode. I really do. But I think that that is a fair grade to give it. I really would like to have given this one a better grade. In terms of the grading for it, it reminds me of the episode The Legend in Series 1. Everybody remembers that. That was a whole Let Me Be Your Führer thing. And I had comments about that one, about, again, the small things that brought the grade down. Great story. Loved watching it. The acting work, the characterization, the psychology of that episode is also so excellent. But just the one or two things, the unfulfilled potential of that episode brought the grade down. And it's really the same thing here. And I think that that's where I have to end it. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so that you get notifications about when new videos are released. And please leave your comments about this and other episodes. I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there who enjoy this episode as much as I did. It's one of the very first ones that I saw back in 1988, and that covers the original as well as the revival. One of the very first ones that I remember watching of the entire series. And like I said, I do thoroughly enjoy it, but I call things out as I see them. Thank you guys again, and I'll see you next time.